When patrons ask, they shall receive. So, one of our Patreon supporters, Francis, asked if we could do our Who Could Beat the Mountain format for a prime Robert Baratheon, and we are certainly happy to have a go. But before that, let's get the plugs done so the currently cheesed off algorithm can be appeased.
All praise the algorithm.
All praise the algorithm. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, guys. It really does help us out, and any constructive feedback in the comments is always appreciated, as long as you aren't rude and obnoxious about it. That's my job, and I'll be damned if I let people muscle in on my turf as resident douchebag. Before we dive in, we'll also just clarify we're only using characters from the A Song of Ice and Fire series. So no House of the Dragon or Duncan Egg characters, as if this video does do well, you know for sure we're going to milk those eras just like we plan to do with the Mountain. Show the Homelander clip, Tom.
Nope.
Also, like our Mountain series, this is who could beat Robert, not who will beat Robert. And the could part is an even more important distinction than it was with Gregor. The Mountain is kind of like a Souls boss, an overgrown monster whom to many is an insurmountable challenge. Yet, he does have this very clear blueprint that can be exploited, that being the effect his heavy equipment has on his already crappy stamina, and the fact he is capable, but ultimately not a top-tier warrior when it comes to fighting skill. Not to mention, he lacks in cunning and countering it. This is not so much the case for Robert. Prime Robert is one of those video game boss fights where it's hard-coded for the player to lose no matter what, even if you knock his health bar down to nearly zero. Actually, maybe it is just like the Mountain. Bobby brings all those things that makes the Mountain so damn scary, such as immense size, strength, and ferocity, all packaged nicely into top-quality plate armor. Robert isn't known to be quick for a man of his size. He's just quick point blank. He doesn't lack the stamina like Greg does. He's proved that with the whole 3 battles in a single day thing. He isn't a mediocre fighter when it comes to skill. He's undeniably in the very top tier, even if you disagree with our rather controversial take that he's number 1. And according to one very honest, says it how it is source, he's peerless as a warrior. Then to add the diarrhea icing to the turd cake that is facing him in combat, he's rocking a weapon that gives no craps about your armor and is so unrealistically heavy that it would blow through almost any attempt to parry it, and one clonk in the wrong place will result in, at best, broken bones, and at worst, instant death.
That thing does not obey the laws of physics at all.
He truly is a medieval knight's worst nightmare given form. I guess what we're trying to say is that while for the Mountain we kind of expect those who we think could to be taking it at least 6 times in 10 on a good day, for Robert, we're being a bit more lax and considering those fighters that would at least be pushing their win count closer to the 50% mark than most. Anyway, Tom, enough rambling. Let's kick things off, and at number 7, we've got all the silly joke suggestions we normally save for the pre-number 1 spot. Drogon, 1-1, the Night King, Joffrey, the Boar of the Kingswood, alcoholism, marriage to Cersei, take your pick. I'll level with you here. Cards on the table, I just really wanted 7 fighters so I could tie it into themes of the 7 or a trial by 7 or the 7 kingdoms to be all thematic and shit. And 7 just sounds better than 6, and making the 8 sounded even better than 7, but as it turns out, it's really hard to find warriors around during the main series and the rebellion that are capable of taking down a 6'6", highly skilled, plate-clad army soloing Chad swinging around a 30-pound warhammer like it's nothing, with the objective strength of a demigod and the intended strength to at least match the strongest people in Westeros. But more on this later. Moving on, Tom buddy, to the serious ones. Our number 6 is the Greatjon Umber. Standing at 7 feet tall, the Greatjon is one of the very few people in Westeros that can claim greater height and reach than Robert, along with having, at the very least, comparable strength to the Demon of the Trident. Again, depending on how you judge Robert's strength. He's also got a reputation for being an incredibly formidable warrior, and out of all the High Lords in the north, actually seems to keep his skills sharp on a regular basis, since his home is the first line of defense against any wildlings that make it past the wall. On top of this, he rocks a great sword that's even bigger than ice, which, to remind you, is a big chonky boy that's large, even by greatsword standards. So Seven knows how big Greatjon's big, ugly piece of steel is. Wait, George, is that a metaphor? Why is this a good thing? Well, combined with the Greatjon's height, it puts Robert at a very significant reach disadvantage, meaning Robert's the one who's got to close the distance, which Greatjon can utilize to somewhat dictate the ebb and flow of the bout, and of course, help keep that hammer from making contact. Lord Umber is also one of the few on this list who isn't totally screwed if Robert does close the gap to grappling distance. If, and it's a big if, he can get a hold of that hammer without getting clonked and turn the fight into a wrestling match, Greatjon has the size and weight to potentially bully Bobby B. Remember, this guy is supposedly as wide as he is tall, so the dude is for sure fucking heavy, and physical strength and skill in wrestling only gets you so far if your opponent weighs vastly more than you. And let's really drive this point home. Greatjon had his own squad of Freymen trying to drink him under the table at the Red Wedding, and they still fucked it up when it came to subduing him. I guess the point is, dude's pretty strong. The problem the Greatjon has is the greatsword versus the hammer. Assuming they're both clad in plate, the hammer will beat out the greatsword in a slugging match near on every time. And I'm not sure the Greatjon is the caliber of swordsman that could surgically place his sword into armor gaps, at least not without getting twatted by the hammer as a thank you for the attempt. I don't think he's the safest bet you could make against the demon, but he could do it with a bit of favourable circumstance. Have some faith in the North, guys, come on!
I know I'm a real-life Northerner, but no bias, promise.
At number 5, we've got Jaime Lannister. The most gifted swordsman Sir Barristan has ever seen, and considered a GOAT-level swordsman by the author himself. Jaime is a natural when it comes to all things martial. The problem he's got in this fight, so is his opponent, and Robert has put his money where his mouth is a hell of a lot more than Jaime, not to mention the size and weapon disadvantage. And trust me, size and strength along with endurance starts to matter 7 hells of a lot more if you involve top quality plate armor. Still, it would be extremely unfair to the Kingslayer to suggest he doesn't have a dog in the fight. While a warhammer is a terrifyingly brutal weapon against plate armor, and that's just a regular one, not this horrific monstrosity Robert wields, there are a couple of weaknesses in the weapon itself that you can exploit with top-tier fight IQ. It's not slow like pop culture would have you believe. In fact, they are scary fast and exceptionally difficult to dodge in the right hands. It's in their nimbleness and maneuverability that a sword has them beat. The other concern for the hammer is in how it does worthwhile damage. It can't cut and thrust like a sword and relies on the momentum generated in the swing. These two factors require the user to pay far more precise attention to distance management than that of one wielding a sword. It's not a particularly crippling weakness, especially when the person swinging the hammer is highly skilled and experienced in its use, since they know this stuff and are thus conditioned to lunge the correct distance when on the attack and beat an earlier retreat if you try to close with them. But it's there, and Jaime is that supremely high level of gifted in martial aptitudes that you need to be to potentially use it. The struggle lies in the size and strength disparity and Jaime's own hubris and arrogance. Jaime, thanks to the effects of old age, pies, and, death on other top-tier warriors, is the best fighter around during the time of the main series, but by golly, he knows it. Getting cocky with Robert or thinking he could get away with getting into grappling distance without getting ripped in half, or that his sword skill alone is enough to carry him, would be nothing short of a death sentence for the Kingslayer. Tom has also made a note in the script to mention that Jaime thinks due to his skill and speed, he could take down anyone. Now, we can't take this as gospel because it's coming from Jaime, I'm the greatest ever, Lannister himself, but it does show he does at least think about how he could deal with bigger fighters like Robert, which in turn is a point in his favor. He would need to give it no less than 110%, and definitely not fuck around. But on a good day, Jaime is a safer bet than most. Moving on. At number 4, we've got my favorite dog, Sandor Clegane. Sandor brings legendary sword skills much like the Kingslayer, but stands a little higher on our win chart due to bringing other important factors that can be handy for dealing with Robert. 1, like Greatjon, he's bigger than Robert, comparably strong, and also noted for being wickedly fast. I mean, this guy can hold off the mountain at the end of the day, meaning, like Greatjon, he isn't totally fucked in a grapple, and can close to those distances in effort to nullify the hammer's effective range. 2, this guy never ever fucks around in a real fight. He's cunning with extremely refined killer instincts. There's no arrogance or hubris, and nothing is above his savagery. If a kick to the balls will get him the upper hand, be sure Sandor is loading up that boot. And in a situation like this, like I said in our Nightmare matchup video, I think Sandor's MO would be drop his sword and go for broke by trying to rip the hammer out of Bobby B's hands to help equalize his odds. The question really does come down to just how strong is Robert in comparison to Sandor. So let's stop dicking around and beating around the bush and finally address Robert's strength. Look, we all know that George messed up when it came to calculating the size of Robert's hammer. Even George himself has admitted it. It still doesn't make it any less canon, and this really does make Robert's strength difficult to quantify realistically. By all estimates that factor in his ability to wield that hammer as a viable battlefield weapon, his strength is even greater than that of the Mountain, bordering into superhuman and, as previously iterated, demigod territory. Realistically, however, I do believe it was George's intention for Prime Robert to be freakishly strong, even for his immense size, but I think he is possibly supposed to fall somewhere between Sandor and the Mountain for strength, possibly matching Gregor at an absolute push. So, if you're taking Robert's objective, but ultimately a mistake-made canon strength, Sandor, and really no one to be honest, has a prayer of contending with him whatsoever in a fight, apart from giants like Mag and One-One, as one hit from that hammer would send most people flying towards the sun. If you take into account what I think was his intended strength, Sandor can probably hold his own, and on a good day, a hound can take down a stag, in what would most assuredly be the most brutal fight of this bunch. We'll take him together, Sandor. You first. At number 3, it's the Sword of the Morning, Sir Arthur Dayne. Basically for all the same reasons as the Kingslayer, but with none of the flaws that might cause Jaime to self-inflict an L. Dawn may also be handy in helping Dayne keep his distance and out of hammer range, since its greatsword length and its Valyrian steel-like properties will of course give him a bigger lead on the nimble and maneuverable front versus a standard sword, which already has that edge over a hammer. But that is it. Dawn doesn't cut through armor despite the internet consensus. It's a fan myth. We actually did a video on this last year and turned over every fucking stone we could find to try and validate this claim. Where I think Dayne needs to be very careful is his honorable nature. The guy was deemed to be the finest knight Ned Stark had ever seen. Now let it sink in for a moment whom that statement came from. Yep, the guy would have been the epitome fuck you Tom Valkenman and Nils Dondarrion, I'm owning it, of chivalric ideals and fair play. And while Bobby was famed to be a nice guy who was known for keeping his word, I do get the impression he was very much an anything goes in a fight to the death sort of guy. In other words, if you break his hammer, Sir Arthur, for the love of fuck, do not let him have a second one. Do I think Dayne's got good odds of pulling off some wins? Abso-bloody-lutely. If he goes in with the right game plan especially, potentially going for the armpit of Bobby's hammer arm when he loads up a swing. But unlike our top 2 picks, I still think he's pushing into that 40 to 50% ballpark rather than surpassing it, even with his magic sword. Still, a safer bet than most. Our number 2 is the guy that would make the list for any video of this type. It's Oberyn Martell. This guy is Bobby's nightmare matchup for a reason. If given some rudimentary knowledge of who he's going up against, Oberyn really is kind of just the guy to have on retainer if you find yourself with a persistent need of a champion to stand for you in a trial by combat against the best Westeros has to offer. His top-tier skill and proficiency with multiple weapons, combined with his extensive experience, prodigy-level intelligence, cunning, and willingness to be underhanded as fuck, puts him into the position of being able to defeat just about anyone, providing, of course, weapon parity and poison checks aren't enforced. It's no different for Robert. In fact, it's 10 times worse for the Demon of the Trident. Robert is extremely tough and has displayed freakish endurance on more than one occasion. As such, he really doesn't seem to mind getting wounded in battle and just soldiers on through it. This is actually why it's such a hard fight for warriors like Jaime and Dayne. Not counting the exceptionally difficult, near-on impossible to get to, armor-covered spots that would take Robert out of the fight almost instantly, it's not getting their sword in that's the problem, it's getting it in and not having Robert power through the wound to hit them full force anyway. Just ask poor Rhaegar. This ridiculous level of tenacity is such a great trait for Robert to have against pretty much everyone. Except Oberyn. One scratch, and that's it. Done. Getting a scratch past the plate armor may be extremely difficult, but with a good reach weapon and a light-on-his-feet approach, the Viper is certainly worth placing a gold dragon or 2 on for taking more than half the wins. Get him, Oberyn, and don't fuck around. And we've made it to our final pick and safest bet. Who is the actual greatest knight to have graced the 7 kingdoms? That's right, it's the one, the only, it's a prime Barristan Selmy!
But George said that Dayne with Dawn.
I don't give 2 craps what George said, random internet person. I love the man, I love his work, but this is also the same guy that said Jaime could beat Aragorn, which... no. If you look at actual feats and what these characters have actually accomplished in universe, no one. Not the Sword of the Morning, not the Demon of the Trident, not even the Red Viper holds a candle to Barry the Bold in his prime. In his old age, I'd give him good odds of securing a win or 2 over Robert through wisdom and clever tactics, but in his youth, I honestly think Barristan is the only warrior who would have Robert bent over his knee, ready for a firm spanking. Now, this isn't to say that Barristan is immune to the weapon disadvantage or that Robert's size and strength suddenly doesn't matter. It does. That hammer warrants caution for anyone. It's just that, unlike Arthur Dayne and Jaime Lannister, Barristan in his prime has demonstrated it really doesn't matter how bad the odds are, he finds a way to win. And without the hindrance of old age, the guy has shown he is an unstoppable force. I mean, even in his old age, he's still putting in a good effort with that trait in fairness. During the rebellion and the Battle of the Trident, where he was pushing close towards 50 years old, he still cut down 12 notably skilled warriors by himself before essentially getting ganked like Jaime did at the Whispering Wood. But unlike Jaime, those fuckers at the Trident were going for the kill. Robert's size and strength is also unlikely to faze a prime Sir Barristan. This is perhaps best demonstrated by the War of the Nine Penny Kings, where the dude basically soloed his way through the Golden Company, you know, the finest sellswords around, and then took down Meleys the Monstrous, a 7 to 8 feet tall beast of a man with strength feats that make the Mountain look like a toddler by comparison. You think decapitating a horse with a greatsword in one swing is impressive? How about being able to kill one with a single punch? Meleys was also wielding a Valyrian steel sword, so Selmy was at an even bigger disadvantage. Even Dayne's best feat of skill, defeating the Smiling Knight, has been matched by Barristan, and possibly, depending on how you look at it, even a little eclipsed. Since Barristan also defeated the Smiling Knight, clashing with him during the same mission in which he slew the leader of the Kingswood Brotherhood, Simon Toyne. So the Smiling Fuck was basically a side quest for him. And he did this at the age of 45, by the way, so firmly out of his prime, and he didn't even have the advantage of a magic sword like Dawn. So Arthur basically cleaned up Selmy's sloppy seconds. I'm sorry, George, I know it's your world, but seriously, in what universe is Dayne even fit to lick this guy's boot? Robert in his prime really is a knight's worst nightmare. If you want to beat him more times than he beats you, you need the best knight of them all. And despite what George says, that is undeniably a prime Barristan. Hold your head high, Selmy. You earned this one. And that's our take. We hope you enjoyed, Francis, and thank you very much for the suggestion. Now let's hand the floor over to you guys. Can you name any fighters from the main series we missed able to take down a prime Robert Baratheon?